Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Josef Schachter, founder of the Schachter Energy Report online at SchachterEnergyReport.ca. He's speaking to us from glorious Calgary. Welcome back to the show, Josef.
My pleasure. Good to be with you again.
Josef, we're getting so many different outlooks now on what's going to happen with energy, the bears versus the bulls. What side of the camp do you fall on, or can you see both points of view?
Well, let me give you the bulls argument, and then I'll give you the bears argument, and then I can give you where I am. The bullish argument is that inventories have been coming down from last year. For example, the report that just came out this week from the EIA showed that last year you had a storage level in the States of 492.4 million barrels, or 25 days of total of demand at that time. And we're now looking at this week's numbers, 430.8, or 21.7 days. So 25.1 versus 21.7. There's the bull argument. The same thing they're arguing, that OPEC's not increasing volumes, U.S. production is stable at 11.3 million, and that there's a shortage of oil around the world. 2 points I'd make against that, or a number of points I'd make against that, is I don't think you should be using 2020 as your comparison year. I think you should be using pre-pandemic numbers. So if you go to the late October of 2019, they had storage then at 438.9 million barrels, or 20.3 days of current demand. Demand then was 21.6. Now, last week we were at 19.8. And then if you go back to 2018, which was a very robust year for the sector, they had storage levels for crude oil of 426 million, and demand was 20.997, so it had 20.3 days of supply as well. So when you compare 21.7 to 20.3 of 2019 and 2018, that to me means you've got an adequate supply. So the bulls are saying there's a shortage of oil, and you look at the crazy prices that are going on for natural gas in Europe, spot LNG in Asia, that because you're seeing those two, they're saying buy, we're going to $100 by the end of the year. You've got 141,000 contracts, I believe, on December of 2021 for $100 crude. That's how bullish it is. And there's a ton of people now buying December 2022, $200 crude oil prices. So to me, this reminds me of 2018 in Q2, when the whole world was saying, we're running out of oil, we're 147, we're calling for 200, demand is recovering, is strong, and there's not enough supply. Well, you got a couple of negatives on that. One, there's 5 million barrels of excess capacity right now in OPEC, so as they bring on 400,000 barrels a day per year, even Bloomberg is saying that by second quarter of next year, we're going to have a build in inventories and start seeing a surplus. Second point I'd make is the two biggest economies in the world are slowing down. You saw the GDP number for the States at 2%. The Federal Reserve of Atlanta thinks that the fourth quarter could be flat, so heading to recession potentially in Q1 of 2022. And then, of course, we have China, where they're trying to lower emissions and clear the air so that they can be ready for the February 22 Winter Olympics. So most of the East Coast or the coastal areas of China have been forced to shut their industrial manufacturing, to shut down their coal-fired facilities. So if the two biggest economies in the world are losing demand or weakening demand, then the upside assumption that people have of demand in 2022 may be wrong. And then of course all the countries that deal with these two countries and with all the supply chain issues we're facing, I think this is I'm more in the bear camp, because I think there is adequate inventories. We've had a massive run from March, April of 2020 to where we are now at 83, 84 at the high, and I think we're going to see prices sub 60, maybe even into the 50s, low 50s, potentially sometime in Q1 of next year.
The new federal cabinet, the new environment minister used to campaign for Greenpeace. He's dyed in the wool, anti-pipeliner, anti-fossil fuel, anti everything. What kind of a message?
He likes riding his electric bike or his electric car to wherever he's going, and doesn't get on any planes because it's like the whole thing of Al Gore. He talks one way and he lives a lifestyle differently, and Suzuki the same way. What I tell you is what you should do, but don't look at what I'm doing. And to me, that's abhorrent. And if he can get Trudeau to disappear on the day of reconciliation, to go off on a holiday and fly in a Canadian government plane off to BC, for a holiday, I'd be interested to see if this new cabinet minister starts taking rail or EVs, to wherever he's going, and show a good example. If he doesn't, then it's the typical hubris of elected officials saying, do what I want, not do what I do.
Sure. Now, in Vancouver, Harbour Air is working on the world's first electric plane, which makes sense because I think their maximum run is 90 minutes, so most of their trips are half an hour, 45 minutes. But if you're going transcontinental or trying to fly any length in Canada or the U.S., and we are massive countries, I don't think electric planes are really going to work out.
No, I think that distance, as you said, is the issue. The same thing with cars. We need to have bigger batteries, or batteries that can charge faster and that have more charge, so that you can go longer distances. And that, I think, is something where we're going to need technological breakthroughs. And I think that's part of what Biden's plan is to have money to help stimulate the engineering and the research, so that we can come up with more efficient and more alternative wise, where you can say, okay, here's what my full cost of driving a regular car versus an EV car, and including taking into account that I may need to replace the battery at some point. Once those arguments can be made in favor of EVs, and GM, Ford, Volkswagen, all the others have some product out there competing with Tesla, with sufficient alternatives at different price points, I think the assumptions of how many EVs would be on the road by now has been way overly optimistic. China's really been the only one that's shown significant growth, and we're going to need better cars from all the manufacturers to entice people to do the switch.
I have seen so many articles that say if we switch to 100% EVs, except for the people who like to clunk around in their antiques, we need to improve the electrical grid and supplies by 100%. I don't see that happening right now.
No, renewables were supposed to solve the problem, but now we know the renewables don't work when the wind doesn't work, or when, for hydro, if the water levels are too low. And so, I think people have been putting too much of a bet on renewables, and renewables just haven't met it. So the question is, are we going to find, put up a lot more solar, which, again, you need the sun for that, and then storage on times when there isn't the sun. And then, of course, we're going to need to see, what do we do instead of wind, and tidal, and hydro is going to be a problem longer term with methane, as well as the water table. So all in all, I think that, this whole thing that's going on in Glasgow is going to be a lot of, great commentary and great promises, but delivery is going to be, for future generations, 20, 40, 50, 60. So these politicians won't be in office at that time. So whatever promises they make, people will forget by the time these deadlines come. And every deadline that they've made so far, they've missed what they said they were going to do.
Well, because of that, why don't we just start building seawalls in areas prone to flooding? Just start building them now. And even if we don't need them because of rising sea levels, we know in stormy weather, what we have out there gets breached anyway.
Yeah, and that's what they did, down in New Orleans to some extent, so they didn't get as much damage this time when they had hurricane season. But, the key thing is going to be is, the breakthroughs on technology. Government edict is not an issue. The other one is the industry is still waiting to find out about the carbon credits. So while there's going to be an increase in the carbon tax, which of course goes into the federal coffers, and then little pennies of it go back to individuals, the companies are saying, where's the carbon offset credit, so that if we do a good job and if we do make significant progress with new technologies and our investments to improve the climate, are we going to get these offset credits? And so far, it's been mute from the government, and unless they can show with the stick and the carrot at the same time, just throwing the stick at you, is going to end up being a court battle issue rather than people say, okay, it's balanced.
Well, when it comes to the Trudeau government, he's been in power for 6 years, and he made some big promises back in 2015. He hasn't done any of them yet.
No, and I think that's why he put this fellow in the environment post, because I think he wants to be, he wants to show progress, especially for, the voters in Eastern Canada that have supported him. I think, he's trying to grab this from the NDP. And of course, we haven't seen the Conservatives show up on the map on this thing to any degree. So I think that, he thinks this is going to be a place for him in the next few years to, if something does break through successfully for him, that he can use that as leverage to get a majority government and stay in power again.
We'll have more with Josef Schachter right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Josef Schachter. Josef, so what's your short, medium, and long-term outlooks here on the energy industry?
Well, number one, between the two commodities, I think natural gas is going to be the long-term winner, simply because of the environmental benefits of it and the fact that we have an abundance of supply here in Canada, assuming we can drill it up and move it. Moving is the issue. The LNG Canada, can we get the second train there? Can we get the pipelines built? And can there be additional projects on the west coast of Canada longer term? Getting a project to the east coast of Canada, I think, is just rhetoric. I don't think there's any fundamental economic basis to make that work. And then on the oily side, I like the light oils versus the heavy oils, because I think over time the barrels that are found internationally are going to be more heavy. And if there is a change in regime in Venezuela, I think most of the companies that used to own the oil are U.S. domestics that have refineries on the Gulf Coast. So if they have a choice of buying Canadian heavy oil versus buying Venezuelan heavy in the years ahead, I think the Venezuelan heavies will win, and potentially we could lose 1 million to 2 million barrels of our 3.5 million barrels of exports. So I think longer term, the heavies have a problem and differentials will widen significantly. They've already started to widen from where they were just a few months ago, but they could widen even much more in the years ahead. So I like in the short term to be defensively postured, because I think the stock market's had a massive pendulum swing from hating everything in March, April of last year to loving everything, and almost everybody is pow-powing how wonderful the sector is and how big how wonderful the cash flows are. But the reality is it's a pendulum business. It moves, and if the economy in the States and China slow down, that means demand is going to go down, and if there continues to be improvement in U.S. production and OPEC continues their 400,000 barrel a day increase per month, then we're going to be sitting on a glut of oil sometime in early 2022, and that means prices will come down. And so, we move from negative pricing to the mid-80s. There's no reason we can't see a pullback if demand, doesn't grow in 2022 or even decline somewhat versus the assumption of a growth of 1 million or 2 million barrels, which is the consensus view right now. Then that would mean the prices would drop into the 50s, low 50s. And so for the medium term, I think people should be defensive as well. But for the long term, I think that the demand for energy is going to grow, especially for natural gas because of, the environmental benefits and the, and of course electricity needs. And then in terms of lighter oil, remember, a lot of products that we use day to day come from petrochemicals. And so even if the demand drops for gasoline and diesel because of EVs, and of course you want to get rid of diesel because it's more environmentally problematic, then, and go to battery technologies, then you may lose a couple million barrels a day of demand from the gasoline and diesel side, and that'll be potentially means that again, if OPEC production stays where it is or grows, then you're going to see a glut, which starting longer term, if you go into 3, 4, 5 years from now, if the industry underinvests, then you're looking at potentially a shortage developing again because of that underinvestment. So I'm in the camp that longer term the industry has got a great opportunity, but we've swung so much from the lows of March, April of last year to where we are now that we've gone from fear to greed, and I think that stock prices are pushing their value limits, and that any drop in prices, you drop from 80 to 70, 70 to 60, the higher cost companies are going to feel the pinch more than those who have lower costs, and also those that have better balance sheets will do better than those that have problematic balance sheets. So I think that for people who own stocks that are leveraged with bad balance sheets, and assuming that the cash flows of this quarter can be annualized, I think that's going to be a mistake. And I think that those stocks that are that with balance sheet problems are going to be the ones that are going to have the most downside over the next 6 months.
Canadian LNG, we have one major plant being built in Kitimat. I think it's going to cost $13 billion. I'm not sure on that number. But the amount of money that this could generate for Canada as a whole, BC particularly, one ship leaving that dock will carry $110 million worth of natural gas to Asia, and they plan to send out 350 ships a year. Roughly $50 billion.
Yeah, it's a big number, and that's only on the, you've got to take into account that they're probably going to put 2 trains in there so that they're going to have double the facilities, because of the economics being so attractive. So once they get this one built, the expansion is probably going to be approved by LNG Canada's board. And then the question is, do any of the other projects sponsored by the First Nations and supported by some industry players in partnership, will those go forward as well? So potentially by the end of this decade, it could be a very big boon to BC, also to Alberta, and of course there'll be a lot of jobs, create a lot of royalty tax revenue coming into the provincial government. So I think that natural gas is going to be the home run industry, and as you said, the demand in Asia is and the pricing in Asia is so much higher than the domestic market. You're even seeing Canadian companies shipping gas down to the Gulf Coast now under contract because the spread between the price in the Gulf Coast in the U.S. and Asia is massive, and it means big netbacks to the LNG producers like Cheniere and others, as well as to the producers of the natural gas that are shipping it to the LNG export facilities.
Friend of the show, Stuart Muir, also points out the Aboriginal communities where these natural gas pipelines go and where the plants are being built are 80% in favor because they see the economic benefits. The kids can have a future working at those plants. They're getting university training to be engineers there. And when you see protests in cities, the people who actually live on the ground there want the money, they want the revenue, they can see it's being done in an environmentally responsible manner. They hate it when somebody else, appropriates their outfits and decides to block intersections in cities like Vancouver and Toronto.
Yeah, if someone's not seeing the benefit of it, or if there's a group that's seeing that the pipe doesn't go through their lands and they don't see an economic benefit directly. So I think that the producers and the builders of the pipelines have to realize that the communities that are impacted by this all must see a trickle down effect to them, and so that the opposition sees doesn't stop or halt any of these projects moving forward. And we've seen too many times, Northern Gateway, etc., where if the opposition gets significant enough and the voices in favor don't get heard, and there's a lot of First Nations who wanted that project to go forward, then you're going to have problems. And really, it's an issue of, the industry in Canada is doing a great job in terms of making environmental progress, lowering emissions, coming up with new technologies like dual fuels for drilling rigs, so that they're not using diesel, they're using natural gas at the source, which lowers the emissions. You also have dual-fueled fracking units. The first one's coming on by Trican in the next few weeks. And so you've got, the industry doing a lot, but they're not getting credit in the media, and the industry has to, stand up and be heard from about all the progress they're making, rather than being seen as the evil, ugly industry that is the perception today.
The 5 hereditary chiefs who ran for their local councils were all defeated, and yet those are the 5 whose voices were heard in Ottawa, and they decided to be anti-pipeline.
Yeah, I'll pass on that because I don't know the details. But again,
that's from our friend Stuart Muir.
It's a question of who sponsored them to be opposition. Were they getting paid by the environmental groups to begin, because they didn't have domestic revenue coming for themselves? So they became supporters of the negative side. Because of the financial support that they got to oppose these projects. So, to me, this issue of when you see an opposition, number one, you want to ask the question, are you really more environmentally doing the right things, or is this just a rhetoric point, or are you being sponsored by somebody who's in opposition and you're making money off of the negative case rather than really thinking about the people that you represent or should be representing?
I saw a satellite photo showing massive methane leaks in the Russian natural gas pipelines. No, I didn't see any in the same satellite image coming from the Canadian natural gas pipelines.
I think you're probably absolutely right there. Canadian companies and Canadian pipeline companies have been working away. And if you go listen to any of their presentations when they report their Q3 results in the next weeks or so, I think you'll hear that they're making a lot of progress. The Russians don't care. This Glasgow meeting that's going on, OPEC's going to be, saying, you want us to grow production and you're not prepared to grow your own production. Maybe we won't grow our production and you guys will pay even more prices. And you got Russia saying, look, you want our gas in Europe, stop attacking us if you want our support, you want our gas, don't point a finger at us. And Russia and China are way behind in terms of meeting their environmental, commitments, assuming that they even intended to commit to make those commitments, or just throw them into the future. 2035 now, make it 2050, make it 2060, make it 2100.
Well, I don't know what the current Chinese government's attitude is towards their own population, but Chairman Mao was trying to start World War III with the help of Khrushchev, and Khrushchev, who had lived through the hell of Stalingrad, where 2 million people died right in front of him, said, well, that'll cost you 100 million lives if we have World War III. And Mao said, so what? I've got millions more.
He's got a billion more.
Well, at the time, he had hundreds of millions more.
Yeah, and this thing with Taiwan, the saber rattling going on there, I don't think anything militaristic is going to happen outside of the flying over and scaring and everything else, and checking the Taiwan's defenses are on. But I think that once you get past the Olympics, March, April of next year, he's committed to doing it. He wants to merge Taiwan into Greater China as part of one of his long-term goals before he retires. So I think that it's an issue that is in front of us. The American military says it'll be 3 or 4 years. I don't think President Xi wants to wait more than a year before he finds a way of doing it politically or doing it by the militaristic way of getting Taiwan back. I think that's one of his goals. And you see him now wearing Maos suits again versus his wonderful $10,000 suits from England.
Yes, what if China just does a blockade, surrounds Taiwan with military ships, and they can't get their goods out or supplies in?
Yeah, the Americans were going to do that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, put the blockade in. If China did that, they'd be hurting their own economy because they need semiconductor chips from Taiwan Semiconductor too. But the reality is the Americans don't have the military forces in the area, nor does Japan and Australia combined to be able to stop the Chinese from doing that. So one step towards forcing maybe an election change on Taiwan, where the leadership is wanting the status quo, where maybe they find some way to do something like they did with Hong Kong in the beginning, and then it becomes a slow takeover by China, which we've seen before in Hong Kong.
Joseph, the quantitative easing by the Bank of Canada ends November 1st. Does that affect the energy patch?
Well, both Canada and the United States are going to be, lowering their amount of, bond buying, so it'll be less liquidity in the system. And at the same time, if the U.S. economy is slowing because of the issues of the supply chain, plus people not wanting to go to work, plus the tightening of more expensive labor because of the wage increases going on, all of that could mean that we could be sitting with a difficult economic environment in the first half, especially if we see at the same time as this monetary, let's say, tightening because it's less investing, and at the same time we have a large number of these government programs, the Canadian program, CEWS, and the others in the States, all the ones that expired in September. That means there's less liquidity cash flow in the U.S., and that number for the Q3 GDP of 2% in the States is just down from I think 6.7 in the prior quarter. I think that was the number I saw. And so if it's going to be zero or negative in the fourth quarter, and then negative in Q1, then you get 2 quarters back to back of negative numbers. That's a recession, which means that, for example, in the energy sector, prices can't stay up where they are when you have demand destruction. Right now, people see supply being too tight. They're not looking at the demand side. That's why I showed you the number of days of supply of demand in my data when we started the discussion. And to me, I think that if we see more supply coming on at the same time as demand is weakening, and we can see that every week in the biggest economy in the world, the U.S., then I think that's going to be problematic for the sector. And why I love the sector longer term, I think we've gone too far too fast, and the pendulum has gone to the extreme on the other side, on the optimist side, that just going back, slow down in the economy means we're going to have some air come out of this, and prices will retreat, especially from the stocks that have done the most and have done exceedingly well. Remember, some stocks are up 10 times from the low of March, April of last year. So, there's been some fabulous performance in the sector, and we were there, March, April, banging the table, if you remember from our discussions then. And now I'm saying, hey guys, this has gone too far too fast, and, if we do see a disappointment on the economy side, in U.S., China, the two biggest economies in the world, and then the fallout to other economies, that's not good.
We keep hearing people say, and we talked about supplies earlier in the interview, saying we're only 3 weeks away from running out of oil. Is that the kind of panicky talk you hear? But as you cited the statistics, we're always 3 weeks away from being out of oil. That's normal.
Yeah, well, number one, I don't agree with the 3 weeks. I think, because if you look at the number of days I showed you was the number of days of U.S. demand. If I took the storage level and compared it to days of imports, because remember, the U.S. is still going to be producing 11.3 million barrels of oil, plus liquids on top of that. So in the liquids was 7.7 million. So you have in the States 19 million of the 20 that they consume is domestic. So if you don't assume there's going to be any loss in the U.S. domestic, those inventories, and especially the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR is about 600 million barrels. If the United States wanted to see $50 barrel of oil tomorrow morning, all they need to do is say we're selling 10 million barrels a day from the SPR because we think these prices are not justified and that OPEC is gouging. And you wouldn't see, and we're also not going to import oil from OPEC countries anymore. You'll see OPEC reversing their stance, and prices will retreat very, very quickly.
Joseph, thank you so much for chatting with us.
My pleasure as always. Take good care.
My guest has been Josef Schachter, founder of the Schachter Energy Report online at schachterenergyreport.ca. He was speaking to us from Calgary. If you have any questions for Joseph or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook, which is changing its name to Meta, whatever that means for us. But anyway, they'll still be gathering your data. Don't worry. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.